One man knew exactly how the world would end. He read it. Every single page. Every death. Every betrayal. Every moment of agony that was coming. And he walked into it anyway. The other man had no idea. He just refused to stay dead. Both of them carried something this world never asked them to carry. But only one of them chose to carry it alone. From the very beginning. Without anyone ever knowing. And that is where this story starts. Kim Dokja was not a hero. He was never written to be one. He was a reader. A man who sat alone in subway cars and ate convenience store meals and found his entire reason for living inside a web novel that nobody else cared about. 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. A story so long, so brutal, so relentlessly dark that every other reader abandoned it. Every single one. Except him. And you have to understand what that means. Because this is not just a personality detail. This is the entire architecture of who Kim Dokja is. While the world moved around him, while people laughed and loved and built lives, he sat in the quiet and he read about the end of everything. Not because he was broken, because somewhere in that darkness, in that story nobody else could finish, he felt less alone. That should make you feel something, because it means the apocalypse, when it finally came, was not his nightmare. It was the first time the world finally made sense to him. Now look at Sung Jinwoo. Same isolation. Different cage. Jinwoo was the weakest hunter alive. Rank E. The kind of man other hunters pitted when they were feeling generous and ignored when they were not. He walked into dungeons knowing he might not come back out. He did it anyway. Not because he was brave. Because his mother was dying and his sister needed him, and weakness was simply not something he could afford to keep. Both of these men were alone before the story began. Both of them were carrying something heavy in a world that did not notice. But here is the first place where the weight becomes different. Jinwoo carried the weight of survival, of being enough, of proving something to a world that had already written him off. Kim Dokja carried the weight of knowing. And that is so much heavier, because Jinwoo fought to change his fate. Kim Dokja already knew everyone else's fate, and he chose to step inside it anyway. This is where most people stop paying attention. Don't, because what happens next changes everything. When the scenarios began and the world transformed into a brutal system of constellations and stories and death, Jinwoo became something new. The Shadow Monarch. Power built on power. A system that rewarded him for every wound, every sacrifice, every moment he refused to quit. His growth was devastating to watch. He became a force of nature. Cold, precise, unstoppable in a way that made your chest tight just reading it. But Kim Dokja's growth was quieter, and somehow more terrifying. He did not receive power. He maneuvered toward it. Every skill he gained, every ally he collected, every constellation he manipulated, it was calculated. Not from cruelty, from love. The kind of love that never announces itself because it cannot afford to. He knew which characters were going to die. He knew which betrayals were coming. He knew the ending. And instead of using that knowledge to protect himself, he used it to protect everyone around him. Quietly, while pretending he did not care. While building a reputation as selfish and unpredictable so that nobody would look too closely at what he was actually doing. You want to know the truth behind Kim Dokja that almost nobody talks about? He constructed a mask of indifference specifically so that the people he loved would never understand the cost of being near him. He made himself easy to distrust because he knew that if they trusted him completely, they would follow him into the ending he had already planned. An ending that was never meant to include his survival. Sung Jinwoo fought to live. Kim Dokja quietly engineered his own disappearance and called it victory. Now weigh that. Really weigh it. Jinwoo's burden was immense. We watched him carry an army of shadows. We watched him become the thing that gods feared. We watched him absorb grief after grief, losing people, becoming harder, carrying the responsibility of a power so enormous it separated him from the human world he was trying to protect. That loneliness is real. That weight is real. And the fans who love Sung Jinwoo love him because he never put it down. Not once. But Kim Dokja's burden was invisible. An invisible weight, is the kind that destroys you in silence. Every smile he gave was calculated. Every joke he made in the darkest moments was a distraction so others would not see what he was preparing. He read the story. He knew what the story required, and the story required someone to burn. He nominated himself before anyone else could. This is the moment fans fell in love with him. Not the power, not the clever manipulation of constellations. The moment where it became undeniable that this man, this quiet, lonely reader who never expected anything from the world, had decided that everyone else's story was worth more than his own. Without declaration, without asking for gratitude, Jinwoo made you feel awe. Kim Dokja made you feel grief. And grief stays longer. There's something else, something in the comparison that cuts deeper the more you sit with it. Sung Jinwoo became a legend the world could see. Monuments to his power. Creatures that knelt. A name spoken with fear across dimensions. He earned that. Every single piece of it. Kim Dokja became a legend that lived inside the people he saved. Not in monuments. In the fact that they were still breathing. In the story that continued because he refused to let it end the wrong way. His legacy is not written on walls. It is written in the survival of every person who never knew how close they came to being erased. One man's weight was visible to the world. One man's weight was visible to no one. And I want you to think about which one of those is harder to carry. Sung Jinwoo will be remembered as the Shadow Monarch, the boy who had nothing and became everything. That arc is legendary. It deserves every piece of praise it receives. But Kim Dokja will be remembered as the man who read the end of the world and chose to rewrite it, knowing the rewrite would cost him everything, and never once asked for anyone to know. That is not just a character. That is something rarer than power. That is the kind of person who only exists in stories because reality cannot hold them. Both of them carried the weight of the world. That part is true. But Sung Jinwoo carried it on his shoulders, where the world could see. Kim Dokja carried it in his chest, where no one could reach. And when you ask who truly carried more, the answer is not about power levels or death counts or how many gods fell before them. It is about this. One man's burden ended when his story ended. The other man's burden was the story itself. So here's what I want you to answer. Not about power. Not about who wins in a fight, because that conversation misses everything that matters. If you had to carry one weight, Jinwoo's, where the whole world sees your sacrifice and remembers your name, or Dokja's, where you burn quietly and no one ever fully understands what you gave. Which one do you choose? Leave that answer in the comments, because I genuinely want to know where you stand. And if this kind of storytelling is what you come to Manhwa for, the kind that lives in your chest for days after you finish it, then subscribe. Because next time, we go even deeper, into a character whose darkness makes even Kim Dokja look like he had it easy. You do not want to miss that one.